The Detroit Lions have a pass rushing problem. Have we mentioned this yet? Over the last couple of months, there have been a lot of discussions about the Detroit Lions pass rush and whether it's good enough, whether it's, not good enough, whether they can get to the quarterback, or whether they're going to fail to do so. And a lot of people are saying it's going to make or break the season. And we did a whole video on that. There's a whole 15 to 20 minute video of me telling you it's going to be okay and that they will be all right, with many comments telling me that I was dead wrong. If you'd like to take a part in that conversation, like to take part in the discourse, go over, watch the video, leave a comment on other people's comment, right? Go down, enjoy the video, enjoy the discourse, be respectful, but, voice your opinions. I'd love to hear it. But one player we don't talk about a lot, or two players, I suppose, we don't talk about a lot, are buried in the Detroit Lions edge rushers room. Because as much coverage as Aiden Hutchinson gets for being the star, as much coverage as Marcus Davenport gets for being the injured guy, as much as, Al-Qadim Muhammad gets for being a breakout last year, as much as Josh Pascal gets for being kind of a bust, but also still a pretty solid player for the Lions, and as much coverage as those players get, as much coverage as, Ahmad Hassanin gets for being the most recent edge rusher draft pick, there are two players buried on the depth chart that the Detroit Lions brought in a year ago through the NFL draft process as of undrafted free agency. Players that played very well in college, players that played very well throughout their NFL preseasons, and had they not been injured throughout their seasons, could have potentially had a major impact down the stretch for the Lions a season ago. Players that, had they been healthy, we may be looking at in a completely different light going into 2025. Those two players are Isaac Ukwu and Nate Lynn. Isaac Ukwu, the undrafted rookie free agent from Ole Miss a season ago, and Nate Lynn, the undrafted free agent from William and Mary. A big school and a small school guy, two very productive players, guys with a lot of things going for them, and could potentially make some noise on this pass rushing unit that does have cracks in the armor and does have room to climb up the depth chart. So today we'll take a look at both of them together because they are kind of very similar prospects. I have very similar things to say about both. And I want to talk about both of their preseasons together, both of their draft processes together, and really kind of talk about them as a duo because I do think they are very similar as far as characteristics. Now, before we get into it, I do want to say I don't want this to be a clickbait or anything like that. These two are not the answer for the Detroit Lions pass rush. I don't think either of these two is going to develop into a top tier 10 sack player across from Aiden Hutchinson. That is not the goal of this video. It's not supposed to convince you of that. What it is supposed to do is bring to light that maybe, just maybe, there are a couple of young players to develop on the defensive line. Not that they're going to be stars, not that they're going to be Pro Bowlers, not that they're going to be all pros, but simply that they're players that you might want to keep an eye on in the preseason and that could eventually develop into something reasonable for the defensive line to utilize. So with that being said, let's take a look at Isaac Ukwu first. The undrafted free agent from Ole Miss played a good career throughout his collegiate career, right? He was 6'3", 265 pounds, 7.53 RAS score, meaning he had great explosiveness, but mediocre elsewhere, right? His speed, his size, and his agility scores all came back okay. None of them were concerning, but also none of them outside of the explosiveness really stood out to you as, wow, that is something that jumps off the page. He had a good career. He played one season at James Madison and one season at Ole Miss. Before that, he wasn't playing Division I FBS ball, so his stats are a little harder to track down, but the Division I FBS schools and the production is really what we're after anyway. In 2022, he began his career with James Madison and with the Dukes, played in 11 games, totaled 40 tackles, 11 TFLs, 7.5 sacks, 3 passes defended, 1 forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. That performance was good enough to get him up to another level in the SEC, where he transferred to be an Ole Miss Rebel. With the Rebels in 2023, he totaled 30 tackles on a rotational defensive line role, 5 TFLs, 3.5 sacks, a pass defended, and doing so in 13 games for Ole Miss. He finishes his college career with 70 total tackles, 16 TFLs, 11 sacks, 4 passes defended, 1 forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. He was quite good throughout the preseason. He played in all 3 games for the Detroit Lions as well as 2 regular season games. He played in the blowout victory at Dallas a season ago as well as the week after when the Detroit Lions traveled to Minnesota. I believe he got not only a couple of reps when Josh Pascal left the game, but also recorded a tackle on the game for his first and only one of his career. It wasn't a TFL, but it was a tackle to limit a large gain, and it was a good play by Isaac Ukwu. I will say it was a good play for a young player to make, but outside of that, his impact on the season was very solemnly felt. He did have a good preseason, 3 sacks and a forced fumble through just 3 preseason games and not playing the entire game at that. He was really good. He was something that a lot of people really believed could make the roster towards the end of it, and I believe ended up doing so. I believe he made the original 53, but was then eventually bumped back down to the practice squad, where he mostly stayed throughout his career. Like I said, he jumped up a couple of games in the regular season, but none of it was super impactful for the Detroit Lions a year ago. Nate Lynn, on the other hand, is a very similar build at 6'3", 260 pounds as well, with a much higher RAS score, an 8.27 with great explosiveness and elite speed, with okay traits elsewhere being size and agility. Now, Nate Lynn played at a much smaller school. William and Mary, of course, is the school that the Lions drafted Colby Sorsdale from. They've hosted a number of players over the years through, NFL combine drills, through different, pro days, and through different tryouts, through mini camp. They've brought in a number of players from William and Mary. Very few of them have stuck. Colby Sorsdale and Nate Lynn being the only two on the roster as of right now. But it has become a little bit of a pipeline to Detroit. And through his 5 seasons at William and Mary, Nate Lynn was incredibly productive. His redshirt sophomore season back in 2021, he finished the year with 52 tackles, 35 and a half tackles for loss, 12 sacks, and 6 forced fumbles. He returned the year after in year 2022, his junior campaign, where he totaled 61 tackles, 13 tackles for loss, 8 more sacks, 4 more forced fumbles, and another fumble recovery. He finished his career as a redshirt senior in 2023 at William and Mary with 58 tackles, 11 TFLs, 8 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and another fumble recovery, meaning in the entirety of his collegiate football career, he finished with 192 tackles, a school record of 40 TFLs and 28 sacks with 3 passes defended, a school record again of 12 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries. He was a monster at William and Mary. And even though he wasn't going against the best competition, even though he wasn't going up against the best players, he showed a lot of NFL traits. He showed the length, he showed the bend, he showed the quickness and ability to turn the corner. And watching him play does remind me quite a bit of a player like James Houston. And I do think that's the ceiling in the role that he could potentially fill. A pass rushing specialist on 3rd down for the Detroit Lions in 3rd and long situations that may only end up playing 5 to 6 snaps a game, but is going to get you 2 to 3 pressures, might get you a sack in those 3 to 4 snaps in a game. He may not be an every down game wrecker like Aiden Hutchinson. He may not be an elite edge setter like Josh Paschal. He may not be as big or as physically imposing as Marcus Davenport, or even as, prolific a pass rusher as Al-Qaeda Muhammad. But I do think he has a role on this team. Kelvin Shepard has come out numerous times and said, we don't want a designated pass rusher, a DPR, but that doesn't mean they won't have one if it's available. If he can play special teams at a high level, come in on 3rd downs and get consistent pressures, he's going to find a role in the NFL and likely find a role on the Detroit Lions. Taking a look at Isaac Ukwu's preseason, like we talked about, 5 total tackles, 3 sacks, 9 pressures, and a forced fumble through his 3 preseason games. He didn't play the entirety of those 3 games, of course, getting rotated out with the rest of the pass rush, but he's going to have the opportunity to do it again. He was a strong pass rusher in the first 3 weeks of the preseason. He's going to have 4 games this year to continue that trajectory and potentially make the roster. Nate Lynn, on the other hand, only played in 1 preseason game, played through 2 quarters of preseason football at MetLife Stadium, the stadium that took Aaron Rodgers' Achilles, the stadium that has taken and claimed numerous ACLs throughout the years, claimed one in the first week of the NFL preseason in Nate Lynn. In those 2 quarters, he had 2 tackles, 5 pressures, and a sack. He was incredibly productive and off to a really good start. Showed the ability to get around the edge, showed the ability to get to the quarterback, showed the ability to be a good pass rusher in the NFL, and really had a lot of people talking about him being the next star player of the Detroit Lions undrafted rookie free agency core. That, of course, did not end up happening. But in his return to Detroit, because he is still on the roster and will play throughout the preseason, I think he's a good player to watch. I think both of them are really good players to watch. There's going to be a lot of eyes and a lot of talk on Ahmad Hassani. There's going to be a lot of players talking about this player and that player on the defensive line. And I do think that these two will often get overlooked, but keep an eye out for them. Keep an eye out for 57 in Nate Lynn and 53 for Isaac Ukwu, because I do think they'll be some of the more productive players on the defensive line throughout the preseason process. And again, they may not be stars. They may not end up being the, answer to the second pass rusher question, but they could end up being something. They could end up making the roster. They could end up seeing some snaps throughout the season. And truly, who knows? Pass rushers and especially undrafted free agent players have turned into great guys in the past. And sometimes it takes a year or two. Sometimes it takes an injury and a setback to finally reach that ceiling that players have. I truly think Nate Lynn could eventually develop into somebody the Lions could see 3, 4, 5 sacks out of in a season. I think Isaac Ukwu, if he can stay healthy, could provide some good quality, cheap depth as well. I think both of these players are very good. I think both of these players have a chance to do something great in the preseason. And with that being said, I just think they're players to keep an eye on. They're not superstars. They're not household names. But if you want to, keep an eye on players, you want to have somebody to root for on the defensive line, watch for these two, because they were the most productive pass rushers a season ago. They were the best pass rushers a season ago in the preseason. And I have a hunch that tells me that maybe outside of Ahmad Hassanin, they're going to be the most impressive players on tape yet again. So with that being said, watch out for them. Keep an eye on them. With that being said, thank you all so much for watching. Let me know down in the comments below your opinions, your thoughts, and your expectations for these two going into next year. I'd love to hear your opinions for the other players that we've talked about. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.